Welcome to Question of the Week. This is a Facebook Live session where I take on your science faith questions. Every Monday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 12:30 in the afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. This week's question comes from two people, actually. We're going to take on two questions this week, Tommy Jordan and Darren Hairston, who ask questions that are related to each other. Tommy Jordan wants to know, why did God create hominids, and did the hominids coexist with humans? And Darren Hairston likewise wants to know why I think that God created the hominids, and why did he allow them to go extinct? Two very good questions, two very common questions. I'm going to take those questions on in just a minute, but I want to ask you, if you are watching this session on Facebook or on YouTube, please, in the comments section, let us know where you're watching from, identify yourself, say hi. That's really valuable information for us to have. In fact, last week, I just want to say thank you to Kelly Hildebrand, who is actually from Bangkok, Thailand, who checked in the comment section and said hi. My friend Jim Stearns, who is from Des Moines, Iowa, said hi. He's one of the leaders of the Reasons to Believe chapter in Des Moines, Iowa. Teresa Tibbetts from Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, also heads up a chapter for Reasons to Believe in the Waynesboro area, checked in and said hi, as did Jason Montoya. So much appreciation to those people who were willing to take a moment and again, just let us know where you're watching the broadcast from. Also, react to the broadcast. Use the like button if you're watching this on Facebook. The more likes that we get, the more comments that we get, the greater the visibility of this broadcast, the greater the reach of this broadcast. It'll give the broadcast more prominence in people's YouTube feeds. And then finally, if you want to offer your perspective on these questions, why did God create the hominids? Please feel free to do so in the comments section. Even if you don't agree with me, I still want to hear your perspective. I want to create an environment on my Facebook page, both my personal page and my public figure page, where people can feel free to come and discuss without censorship, without restriction, science faith issues. And in fact, after last week's broadcast, my Facebook friend Louis Teixeira, who I believe is a skeptic, asked a very deep and penetrating question challenging my perspective, and that set off a really interesting conversation on my Facebook page. So please, if you, again, want to offer your perspective, I would love to hear from you. Okay, without any further ado, let's go ahead and take on this question. Why would God create hominids, and did hominids coexist with modern humans? Now, for many people, they would look at the hominid fossil record. The fossils that have been discovered in Africa, in Asia, and in Europe of these bipedal primates that had the capacity to walk erect, that produced crude stone tools, as evidence that humans must have evolved. They see the hominin fossil record that extends back almost 7 million years as essentially documenting this evolutionary ascent of man, where humans evolve through a series of transitional intermediates. And again, the fossil record seems to document that evolutionary history. And so that, again, for many people, represents a compelling case for human evolution. However, as an old Earth creationist, I don't view the hominid fossil record in that way. As a creationist, I think that God directly and personally intervened in the history of life on Earth to create human beings de novo. That human beings were created physically and spiritually through God's direct personal involvement, and that an Adam and an Eve, a primordial pair, were the first humans that gave rise to all humanity. And in light of that, I would view the hominid fossil record as not evidence for an evolutionary history of life on Earth, but merely a record of organisms that lived on the Earth in Earth's past history that were bipedal primates. I would think of them in the same vein that I would think of the great apes, chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorillas. Interesting creatures, fascinating creatures that had emotional and intellectual capability, but creatures that lacked a special quality that Christians would call the image of God. I would argue that only human beings bear God's image, that Adam and Eve were created in God's image, and that image of God is propagated to all humanity who are descendants of Adam and Eve. And that the hominids, again, were creatures that God made, remarkable creatures in their own right, but creatures that were animals, that lacked the image of God. And in fact, I have written on our website, www.reasons.org, or in the book, Who Was Adam?, about a number of scientific discoveries that, in my view, undermine the idea that the best way to interpret the hominid fossil record is as if it's reflecting an evolutionary history for humanity. Instead, I would argue that when we interpret the fossil record in light of scientific evidence, it makes best sense to think of it as, again, a record of God's creative work throughout, again, recent history. Now, it is true from the fossil record that it looks like hominids coexisted with modern humans, at least for a period of time. There's very good evidence that indicate that Neanderthals and modern humans coexisted, and in fact we very well could have encountered Neanderthals as we began to migrate around the world, particularly entering into the Middle East, Europe, and in Asia. There's also some indication that we interacted with a highly enigmatic hominid called the Denisovans that also coexisted with Neanderthals and modern humans in Siberia, in Asia. We also have evidence for Homo floresiensis, the hobbit that lived on the island of Flores in Indonesia, that again would have coexisted with humans. It's not clear if we interacted with this creature, but again, evidence for coexistence of humans and another hominid. Recent work on Homo naledi indicates that we probably coexisted with this creature as well. And then there's the red deer cave people, found in Asia, highly enigmatic, not well understood, but are clearly distinct from erectines, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans, again, likely another hominid that we coexisted with. But I don't see that as fundamentally problematic to an old Earth creationist position, because we coexist with all kinds of animals, including the great apes. And so if we view these creatures as creatures that God created that existed for a period of time and just went extinct as a result of natural process mechanisms that, again, for a period of time coexisted with us, I don't think that undermines an old Earth creationist perspective. So yes, indeed, we did coexist with these creatures, but I don't think that is problematic from an old Earth viewpoint, an old Earth creationist viewpoint. Now, why would God create the hominids? Well, as part of that question, of course, I think is embedded the idea that these hominids look an awful lot like us. And so if they're not transitional forms, why would God create these creatures that look so much like us? Well, it's very clear to me that these creatures are like us in some ways, but they also are distinct from us as well. Humans and Neanderthals, for example, show a whole host of anatomical differences. Humans and Neanderthals show developmental differences that are rather significant. And we even show genetic distinctions between humans and even creatures like Neanderthals. So yes, they are like us, but they also are unlike us as well. And I would argue that the similarities that are displayed between humans and the great apes, between humans and the hominids, reflect common design, not evidence for common descent. And I would actually turn to Genesis 2 to begin to justify that perspective. Genesis 2:7 tells us that Adam was made from the dust of the earth and that God breathed the breath of life into Adam. If we go to Genesis 2:19, it tells us that God created the birds of the air and the beasts of the field from the dust of the earth. But interestingly enough, they do not receive the divine breath. I would argue that they do not receive the image of God, the imago Dei. That's something that only human beings receive. But yet it also is telling us that physically, that biologically, we're made out of the same stuff as the animals. were made out of the same raw materials. I would argue we're made from the same templates, the same design features, and so the similarity between humans and other creatures reflects, again, common design, not common descent. And in fact, it's interesting, prior to Darwin, the theoretical framework to interpret shared features among organisms, that is, homologous features, was developed by Sir Richard Owen, who employed archetypical biology, where he argued there was an archetype that existed in the mind of the creator that was functionally manifested in the created order, accounting for homologous features. And so, again, even in the history of thought, when it comes to biology, people were interpreting shared features as reflecting common design, not common descent. And there's a biblical undergirding for viewing the shared features in living organisms in that way. So I think that's one way we can make sense of why these creatures look like us. So often we tend to emphasize their similarities, but there's also very real differences that we see. In my view, the biggest differences would be behavioral in nature, where it's very clear that even creatures like Neanderthals lacked advanced cognitive ability, lacked the capacity for symbolism, lacked what we would call theory of mind, that these are properties unique to humans and properties that align with what we would think the Imago Dei to be. Now, why would God create these creatures? What would be their purpose? Well, this is, in fairness, is a very good question, but a very difficult question to answer. Because in a sense, it's the question that we could ask with regard to any organism. Why would God create that particular organism? And generally the answer is that organism fit into the ecological system. It was part of the ecological system. It played a key role in the ecology of the environment that it found itself in. But my friend and colleague and boss, Hugh Ross, has suggested that maybe the hominids were created by God to prepare humanity for the coming shock of modern humans. When modern humans began to migrate around the world, particularly going into the Americas or into Australia, we triggered mass extinction events because of overhunting and also just the abuse that we leveled against the environment. Even though the numbers of humans migrating were very small, the damage we were causing was inordinate as we began to migrate around the world, again triggering mass extinctions. Interestingly enough, those mass extinctions were minimal in Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And isn't it interesting that this is where we see the greatest preponderance of hominids in this part of the world? So could the hominids have been essentially playing some kind of role, preparing life on the planet, allowing life on the planet to adapt to the appearance of modern humans? An interesting idea. I'm not completely sold that that's the answer, but again, the answer does indeed fit with the data. A recent discovery that creates a little bit of a wrinkle for this explanation would be the discovery of evidence for Neanderthals in the Americas at about 130,000 years ago. So again, an interesting answer. The answer, I think, has merit, but again, I don't think it's the complete answer. Another way to think about the question, why would God create hominids? Why would God create any creatures? Is to think about God more like an artist than like an engineer. I think our tendency many times is to think of God as an engineer, where there's a functional basis for everything that we see in creation. And I believe that that's not unreasonable to think, again, in those kind of terms. But that's how an engineer thinks. But an artist thinks about creating things for very different reasons. Engineers create things for functionality. Artists create things to express themselves for the sake of art itself. And it's very interesting to me when you look at the Genesis 1 creation account. After specific days of creation, God steps back and he says, "It is good." It's as if he's an artist admiring the work that he's just done. The summary of the creation week is everything that God made was good. God saw that it was good. Again, an artist admiring his handiwork. Or when we talk about the idea that the heavens declare God's glory and God's majesty, these are again statements consistent with God, an artist, in my view, as much as, again, God, an engineer. But when we go to Psalm 104, which is another creation account, a creation account that parallels Genesis 1, when we get to the portion that corresponds to the fifth day of creation, it says, God made the Leviathan to frolic among the ships in the NIV. The New King James translated as play among the ships. In the Message, Eugene Peterson translated as the Leviathan romps among the ships. Here we have whales or dolphins that were created for the mere purpose of playing, of frolicking, of romping among the ships. This is indicating that there very well could be features of our world, features of the creation that are merely in place because it brings delight to the Creator, for no other purpose than that the Creator is functioning at that point as an artist. And when I look at the history of life, I see those kind of features over and over again. For example, when we look at the Cambrian explosion, this is the very first appearance of animal life on the planet. And what we see in the Cambrian explosion are these bizarre, weird, unusual animals. And in my view, again, there's a rationale for why these creatures appeared when they appeared, but their bizarre nature makes them so much fun to reflect upon, to contemplate, to study. Or look at the dinosaurs. What little kid doesn't derive fascination and joy from the dinosaurs? And could it be that our Creator likewise is deriving joy from the creatures that he's making, that that's part of the purpose for why he's creating them, just for his pleasure? And when it comes to the hominids, there's so much, in many respects, like the great apes. I imagine that these creatures would bring enormous joy to our Creator. One of my favorite things to do when I go to a zoo is to go to the monkey displays, to go see the chimps, to go see the gorillas. I just am completely fascinated by these creatures. They're so much fun to watch. And again, if this is the response that we have as human beings made in God's image, would it not be the same response that the Creator would have to his creation? Think about it. As human beings, we are compelled to create. We're compelled to express ourselves artistically through music, through artwork, sculptures, through painting, through literature, through poetry. We are compelled to express ourselves artistically. And I think that is the deepest expression of the image of God, of the Imago Dei, is that expression. And it's fascinating when you go into the archaeological record. The archaeological remains associated with modern humans uniquely display evidence for symbolism in the form of art and music, proto-writing. You could think of language again as being a form of symbolism, ephemeral symbolism. But these are all features that in many instances just dominate archaeological sites, where humans were engaged in producing art which had no survival advantage and investing huge amounts of effort in producing art. It is very much part of our makeup. So, why would God create the hominids? Well, I think that God created them to be like us because he employed common design templates. He employed common design principles. He employed archetypical designs. But I also believe that God created these creatures for probably some functional reason that we have yet to fully understand. But I think also God created them because he's an artist. I don't like to think of God as an engineer or as an artist, but as an architect. Architects build buildings that have functional utility, but they are also works of art. And I think that if we think of God only as an engineer, we have a very deficient view of God as creator and of the creation. And when we think of God as an artist, it prompts us, I think, to worship that creator more deeply. It compels us to want to know that creator even more. So, again, great questions that really, I think, prompt us to think through the rationale for why God creates what he does. And while there are going to be aspects of the creation that will always be mysterious, I think one thing is most certain, that when we study the creation, we see evidence for God's fingerprints, for his glory, his majesty, his righteousness, his sense of justice, his love, but we also see, I think, a playful side to the Creator that makes me want to know that Creator all that much more. I'm going to go ahead and bring things to a close. Thank you, Tommy and Darren, for these wonderful questions. And I'm going to conclude by just thanking you for watching this broadcast. Please share this with other people who you think might benefit from this Facebook Live session. Also, don't forget to react to it, to like it, to leave a comment, letting us know who you are, where you're watching from. And again, if you want to ask questions for consideration in next week's program, please go ahead and put those questions in the comment section, or you can send me a private message or post them directly to either my public figure page or my personal Facebook page. Again, we very much appreciate your interest in what we do here at Reasons to Believe. Thank you so much for your support. I want to leave you with these final words. The more that we know about science, the more that we have reasons to believe.